Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and I just finished making this great horned owl mask out of cardboard. It's one cereal box worth of cardboard, the front and back, and a couple of scraps, and it's made over the free blank mask pattern that I showed you a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people have already downloaded that pattern, and I really want to see what you guys make with it. I decided that I wanted to make an owl, and there are a couple of things that I would definitely do differently if I did it again. The first thing is that I didn't use the cap portion of the mask pattern. When I made the original pattern with the cap, it actually feels really comfortable when you wear it, but when you only use the front half, and you have to use straps to hold it on, that pulls the cardboard a little bit too close to your mouth, and I found that kind of uncomfortable. So if I wanted to make another just front of the face mask, I don't know what that's called, I would cut it this way so that my mouth was open. I'd be able to drink and talk and everything, and it would just be a lot easier. What else would I change? Oh, I made these eyes separately. They're just round pieces of scrap cardboard that I put on there, and I thought it would be easier to paint them if I made them separately and then stuck them on after everything else was done, but that was kind of silly. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll show you how I made this just out of cardboard. Might give you some ideas. Even if you don't want to make an owl, you might have some ideas how you could make a cardboard mask too. So let's get started. I found a photo of a great horned owl on Wikipedia, and I used it for my model. I put the blank mask pattern together, and then I cut the hole behind the nose a whole lot bigger. I thought it was going to make it easier to breathe because I didn't measure things correctly. I thought it was going to have a little bit of my mouth open, but that didn't actually happen. I cut some beak shapes out of cardboard, and I actually had to do it a couple of times to find some that really worked. You just had to sketch them out, cut them out, and see if they're going to actually work on the pattern itself. Then I taped the beak onto the mask form, and I tried to keep the center lines all centered correctly. And the next thing I had to have was a pattern for the great horned owl's horns. Of course, they're just big feathers, and I tend to call them ears. I wanted the shapes to be right, and I had to have it to fit over the top of the mask, so I made a temporary ear using some crumpled foil, and when I got it close enough so it looks like it was going to fit, I laid it down on top of a piece of cardboard and traced around it. The upper point of the ear had to be added in because I didn't have enough foil, and I didn't want to mess around with it because I could just sketch it in later. So I did trace around the foil and cut out the ear from the cardboard, and then I traced it around it again so that I would have two that were the same. Then I tacked it on with plastic tape first, just to make sure if I liked it. There were gaps between the bottom edge of the ears and the top edge of the mask, but I covered those with masking tape, and that worked just fine. The feathers that stick out around the eyes were cut out of a scrap of cardboard, and it took several times to get the right shape on these too. The two edges that need to fit up against the side of the beak and below the ear feathers, that was pretty easy. So I cut those out first, and then I sketched around the rounded shape for the feathers. I traced around that piece on another piece of cardboard because I knew I had to draw the rounded shape differently. I didn't like the way it had come out the first time, but I did like the angle where it fits up against the beak. So I kept that part and then just sketched in another shape. I cut it out, made sure it would fit, and then I cut another one exactly the same size and shape. But I needed to see out of the mask, so I tacked the eye feathers onto the mask just to hold them temporarily, and I turned it over and traced around the inside of the eye holes on the mask. Then I set those shapes aside. I'm going to be working with them later. I used some brown paper from an Amazon box for the paper mache. Newspaper would work just as good. I covered all of the mask except for the edges of the ear feather shapes because I'm going to be cutting a feathered edge around that area when the paper mache is dry. And obviously, it would have been easier to just cut the feathery edge before the shapes were taped onto the mask. Would have made more sense, but the way I did it worked. The wet paper mache does make the mask kind of flatten out when you lay it down, And I would normally put a couple of tuna fish cans on the table and just kind of push the edges of the mask together, and that would have helped it keep its proper shape. But this time I thought the roundness made it look more like an owl, so I just let it kind of flatten out a bit. It is, however, and I'm not sure about this, but it's possible that the mask wouldn't press up against your mouth the way mine does if you did use the cans and keep it in the proper shape. I haven't tried that. I don't know if it would matter or not. When it was almost dry, I started cutting the edges of the ear feathers out. I should have waited until it was completely dry, but I was anxious to see what it would look like. And it's obviously not really feathery, but I like it. I'm not trying to hide the fact that this owl mask is made out of cardboard, because that's actually one of the things that I think makes it fun. I found a washer that was the right size for the eye holes, and I traced around it on one of the eye feather pieces and then cut the hole out with an X-Acto knife. I tested it to make sure it was in the right place, and then I traced around the hole on the second piece just to make sure that both eyes were in the same place. Then I used another scrap of cardboard to cut out the eyes. I traced around a cap from a spice bottle. One edge of the eyes needed to be cut so it would fit under the eye feathers. And then after I had that done, I centered the new eye over the eye hole and turned it over again like I did before, and just to make sure that the new eye hole is going to be in the same place on both of them. And I cut those out too with my X-Acto knife. Hopefully that is more obvious in the video than it is from me saying it, because I don't think I said that right. Tried to use a few pieces of brown paper and paste to put one of the eye feather pieces on, but it just slid around too much. I pulled it off and put a few dabs of hot glue on the back of the piece to hold them on, and then I added the paper mache strips. And then I put the mask back in front of the fan to dry some more. Then I cut the feathery edge of the eye pieces, and again, I should have done that before sticking them onto the mask, but I didn't. And then after that was done, I noticed that I had to have some whiskers, kind of like the kind of feathery, whiskery things that come down between the beak and the eyes. So I made a triangular kind of piece and cut it into whiskers and stuck it on with some paste. It would have made more sense to use hot glue to do that, but the glue gun wasn't turned on, so I went ahead and used paste, and it actually did work. While that was drying, I painted the eyes with some yellow that I found in my stash. In the end, it wasn't quite bright enough, so I repainted them after the eyes were glued on and everything else was actually painted. I'm not trying for a realistic painting because that'd be a little weird when everything else is so obviously cardboard. So I'm just looking at the photo on Wikipedia, and I added the black edges to the eye and ear feather bits, and all of the inside of the ears is black. Then there's also going to be a black line around the eyes too, but I'll do that after the eyes are actually glued on. The beak is all black, but the whiskers are white, so I had to lift the whiskers up and paint the black under them. And the top of the head has an interesting pattern of black and orange-brown stripes. I painted those on with the edge of a small brush. That was kind of fun. The feathers below the beak have a similar pattern, but with bigger spots. And of course, that's the part that I'd actually cut off if I made another owl mask, but it was kind of fun painting them on there. There's darker black right under the eye feathers too, at least in the photo that I'm using as a model. And I think probably every owl is different, so you'd want to look at your own model to see where all the spots are going to go. I found some folk art Pueblo paint that was the right color, I thought, for the orange-brown parts. It was a little bit transparent, so it kind of dries a little bit darker with more of the brown paper showing through. I just basically added some white to the Pueblo paint, and I kind of sprinkled the lighter feathers around the eyes. I just wanted to make it a little bit more interesting. And I painted the whiskers, the eye feathers, and the ear feathers with white. At that point, I finally used some hot glue to attach the eyes on there. There needs to be a white area around the bottom of the eyes, and I use my grainer brush for that. It has a lot of hairs, so it makes several marks at a time. I just really like using it. And then I painted the black around the eyes. That's when I noticed that the great horned owl actually has some big white eyebrow looking feathers too. I just, for some reason, I had been looking at that photograph for hours and I hadn't noticed. So I got out my white again and added the eyebrows and a small dab of white for a reflection at the top of the eyes. When the paint was all dry, I covered the eyes with clear fingernail polish. And when the fingernail polish was dry, I added a couple of shoelaces so that I could tie it behind my head. So now it's all done, and like I said, there are a couple of things that I would definitely do differently, but I still kind of like him. I think it's pretty cool. The fact that it's just some cardboard and you just cut it out yourself and stick it on. You can make a lot of different masks using this technique. I mean, it was just really easy. It took a while to get all the pieces the right shapes and stuff, but that's not hard. The things that I would do differently, like I said, is that I would cut it off right there if I wanted just the front of the face, if I didn't want to wear the cap for some reason. It only takes one more cereal box, so there's really no reason to not add the cap. But I thought it'd be just fun to try it, and I don't think it works as well as I wanted it to. So that's what I would do next time. I would add the cap. I did add some shoelaces this time so that to hold it onto my head, and that's what pulls it a little bit too close to my mouth, and I didn't really care for that. Now, if you'd like to use that blank pattern to make your own mask, you don't have to use it for an owl. You can make any kind of mask you want out of it, and that blank mask pattern is free. You can download it here. I'll put a link to that down below too. A couple of people have told me that they couldn't see the little email form that you have to fill out. I can't email you the download link if you don't fill out the form, and they can't see it. And I called some tech folks who say that there are a couple of ad blocker programs that just erase it because they think it's an ad. And I don't have any ads on my website at all. I took them off about 10 years ago. I hate websites that are completely filled with ads. I just hate it. So I took them off, but some, they're AI programs, and so they sometimes make mistakes. So if you don't see the box and the little green button that lets you ask for the pattern, just use a different device or ask someone else to do it for you. Now, if you do make anything, either with this blank mask form or anything else, I do hope you come back to my website and show it off on the Daily Sculptist page. We would all love to see how it comes out. So go make something and come back and visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.